Hello, and welcome to Husky Talk, Broker Than You. I am your host, the best podcast host in the universe, Steve Cully. And with me, as always, my partner in crime, the real estate mogul who dominates Erie, Pennsylvania. If you want to buy or sell your home or rent, there's only one place to go, Marsha Marsh Real Estate and Laban Marsh, my charismatic enigma of a co-host.
So good to
Laban,
see you, brother.
so good to see you too.
I tell you what, that the real estate, it has been a strange couple of weeks and months here, and I'm anxious to dig in. I love that you get
Yeah,
questions from all over.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I want
You get a ton of feedback.
I have to start off because I didn't even post this on Facebook, and I'm usually good about it. But yesterday, my wife and I celebrated our 20th
I saw
wedding
pictures. I thought I saw.
anniversary.
Yeah,
She may have posted something. And I'll tell you what I said. So we went to dinner last night. Actually, I did it somewhat strategically. I'm licensed in New York State as well.
yes,
But there's a Chautauqua Lake, beautiful lake. And, Meg's family had a house up on Scroon Lake. And so she grew up on a lake. My
yeah, right.
grandpa had a place on Finley Lake. So we've both been around water, love
Yeah.
waterfront properties. And so in Chautauqua, we have talked, over the last few years, like where else would we want to own just a second little home, maybe
Oh,
Finley Lake or something. So I decided to take her to this restaurant called, I think it's Lake House Tap and Grill, and it's in this newer hotel it's actually in the town of Celeron, which brought back memories in and of itself. Yeah. But it's in like the southwest corner of Chautauqua Lake. Now in the summer, the quarterback Allen has a place on
Josh
Chautauqua
Allen.
Lake. Yeah, Josh
Okay.
Allen has a place. So it's a great lake. And this was a really good restaurant. But I sat there with Meg last night and just said, 20 years ago on this night, we were getting married. We got married in Schenectady. Okay. We actually got married in
dump.
Loudonville. Well, it's so funny because the
Sc-
restaurant, it wasn't even it's called Glenn Sanders Mansion.
Yes, I'm very well aware.
So
I can't believe you got married there. Oh my
it's
God.
yeah, but listen, the best story leading into the wedding day was Glenn Sanders had incredible food, and I'm a
Yes.
super picky eater. But they let us come in for like a taste test one evening. And
Yeah.
it must have been, we got married November 13th. So it must have been like, I would say June, July, maybe August, to pick out the menu and all that stuff. And so we're sitting there in Glenn Sanders Mansion's restaurant area. And there's a couple, three or four couples sitting at a table. And this guy and his wife walk up to their table, back to us. And I make a comment to my wife about the guy's outfit, right? And how I just didn't think it was a good pairing or something like that. And so we're trying our food and everything. This guy turns around to leave, and my face drops when I see who it is. And apparently the guy at the table that he was visiting with saw my face, and I kind of looked straight ahead, and the guy's like, yep. It was Pat Riley at his high school reunion, dude. So I called my brother Lucas. I'm like, oh man, I told him the story about, hey, I criticized his outfit. And he's like, he was just on the cover of GQ magazine. So he graduated from Schenectady High School. So we got married in 04.
God.
So he must have graduated in like 64, I would guess. I'd have to do some Google search, but I know he is from Schenectady.
Schenectady zone.
And I tell you what, man, when you think about Pat Riley, and man, I mean, that dude from LA to Miami, like being from Schenectady,
and then
New York.
the Knicks too.
Oh, I mean, but like it was just wild to me. It was just one of those instances. And so I looked at him, I saw his face, and then he just kind of walked by. But I was in such shock. And my wife, of course, had no idea who it was.
Right.
And I'm like, that's Pat Riley. What in the world is he doing in upstate New York? What? So yeah, that was just a wild thing. But Glenn Sanders Mansion was such a great time. It was a wonderful wedding. And I think, what as I reflected, it's kind of been a week because my birthday was last week.
Yes.
Turned 46, where I'm getting older and the kids are getting older, which make me feel a lot older. And so I said to Meg last night, 20 years ago, would you have imagined the life that we've
We have.
created? And
Yeah.
I think, when you dream, especially when you dream together, and the things fall in line, and not everything does, because we've had some challenges, but so many more blessings. And wow, it was just awesome. And then, I said, I hope, 20 years from now, I'll be 66. Our daughters will be 26 and 36. And I said, honestly, and part of me now, it's like, man, what am I going to be like in 10 years at 56? What am I going to be like in 20 years at 66? Like, will I have my mental faculties? And I think two
You
things,
will.
right?
You will.
And right, you have to think that way,
You
because
will.
I found, as I started doing research and looking into the brain and the challenges with brain injuries, it'll spiral you into a total depression. And we know that what helps keep you out of depression is showing gratitude. And so for me, it was like I've just tried to pour on, with my wife, and we have,
Well, and your positivity as well.
but it's not easy. And I think,
No.
that you think of that potential demise, if you will. And I think that's where even doing these podcasts, like, it is, it's a challenge, of course, to, get some guests. I do have a couple guys that I've got lined up that just weren't available. But I think utilizing it like you're doing as a connection, right? And honestly, I look at this a lot like therapy. And I'm sure you feel that a lot with people when you interview them. But I think there's so much to be said for having, something to look forward to, right? And this is true, especially for grandparents. Um, but for me, I think, again, being grateful for the 20 years and even the challenges that we've been through, friendships that have changed one way or the other. I think it's so important to keep dreaming. Like, it was easy when we first got married 20 years ago to dream about all the things we wanted to accomplish and the, kids we wanted to raise. And like, I think that's where you get into these midlife crises. Like, whether these identities we've talked about with UConn athletics, or then for a long time, it's your kids. And I
It's
think that's
always
where,
changing. Yeah.
yeah. And it's important to have hobbies and outlets and different things that are healthy. You know what I mean? For some people, it's working out. I don't know if I had mentioned this on a podcast before, but I had a coaching meeting a couple weeks ago, and we talked about like stressful situations. And out of the group of four of us, two of us said, I'd rather just climb into bed and like sleep it off. And then the other two wanted to go work out.
Yeah.
And it was kind of fascinating to me too, because it gets into that personality styles. And then I think as you get, once you're married and you start to live together, especially in these nuances that kind of rub off on each other, and hopefully in a good way. But
And the
yeah,
coping
it's,
mechanisms. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's where, like, my wife can tell when I'm just not doing well or in a bad head spot. And I think there's, as long as you have ways to get yourself out, for me, a lot of times just spending time with my kids. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
not taking life too seriously. But even then, the challenge of getting kids organized and together,
It's so much work.
and going in
Yeah.
the same direction. But I think that's what's also fun. Like, I'm coaching my third grade son in third and fourth grade basketball. And like, anytime I coach this level of kids, I tell the parents, especially the first day, I'm like, none of these kids are going to the NBA tomorrow. None of them. No one's even
That's
getting
smart.
recruited to college. So we're
That's
just
so
going to teach
smart.
them fundamentals, learn how to dribble, get
And have some
along,
fun.
work hard. Yeah. And I think so much in life. And again, I look back on the 20 years and we were so aggressive, and I'm thankful, early on. And so in my card to her, and I do still get cards, but man, they're expensive, bro. Like, cards,
They
greeting
are. They
cards
are
are
now.
super expensive.
Yeah.
But I just said, hey, hopefully the next 20 years it'll be more play than work. But I also think like there is something to be said.
You love your work though.
Yeah, when you want like and we've talked about athletes. Like I don't know many people, even the retirement idea. Like I love when you enjoy what you do, it's not really considered work, maybe, I guess. And then it comes down to like the level of compensation. And so, even for you with podcasts, right? I think that's where I never looked at something like this to monetize, similar to coaching the pole vault. But then once you start to do it and you're doing it better, like there's nothing wrong with monetizing your services for your time. And I think it's easy to pay for a product, right? But
Yes,
when you look at
absolutely.
somebody's time and service, and especially at the high school level, these coaches that don't get paid enough for what they deal with.
Not even
Um,
close.
and so I think again, just looking back on the 20 years, and I remember early on, putting that grind in and wanting to make a lot of money. I still remember guys that would say, "Hey, take a job with somebody that you don't get paid for. Like it's a lesson learned. Like the value in the opportunity is what you're going to learn from people." And that's easier said than done. I
It's
mentioned that once in my
invaluable.
yeah, but it takes that sacrifice, and then the X's and O's or pluses and minuses in the accounting ledger. Like you do have to start thinking about the revenue plus
Yeah,
the
well,
expenses, and I
you got
think
four
that's
kids, dude.
well, and it's not even that. I think that definitely. I think I had more of a burden knowing running a business, having employees,
Oh,
and
right.
understanding the responsibility, not just
To take
but
care of their
for them to have
family.
the opportunity because so much starts to rely on you, and it can get heavy, but at the same time, I think it just requires that focus on projecting what it is you want. That's where goal setting, I mean, vision boards. Some people laugh that off and poo-poo it, but when you look at people who are really successful, a lot of times they had a written plan for that. They didn't
They
necessarily
always
know,
do.
yeah, when it would come to fruition. But again, I think it's something where it's not just in sports, it's not just in business, it's in life also. You have to have a plan. One of the great ideas my father gave to me, especially when we started doing artificial trees, is when we bring the tree out, and in there he would have an envelope, and he would write down a list of things when he put the tree away. So, say you put the tree away in January, and you make a list of things that you want to accomplish that year.
Right.
And 11 months later, you go to set the tree out after Thanksgiving, and you get to see a list of the things that, hey, what's going to happen? And I remember at a point where it's like, hey, will my grandparents still be alive? What are the things? How many homes do we own? How many business do we have? And I said that again before about journaling and things. I can look back at journals even from college. I still have some for my classes. And if I look at that journal, like it can take me back to where I was when I wrote those things down. And
Yeah.
that's what gives me comfort where I get worried about my demise from head trauma. And yet I think because I've done a lot of those things and continue to do them, I'm more likely to retain more of
Yeah.
my capabilities, I think.
I think you will too. I think you will too. I don't
But
think you'll have an issue.
no, and I really don't, but I know the importance on focusing on what it is you want to accomplish, not the bad things or the things that are happening. And I think checklists are great. And you can have a daily checklist, a weekly checklist, a monthly checklist. But a checklist is really goal setting. I
That's all
don't
it
care.
is.
I don't care if it's a grocery list.
Yeah.
So and then yeah, so I guess having that 20-year anniversary, knowing that we met at the University of Connecticut and we talked about, having kids sitting in the McMahon hallways. And it's crazy how you can really manifest the life you want to live by just living it one day at a time, but taking those steps forward.
Well,
And
I credit this success to your relationship because I sang Jewel to you at the freshman talent show.
yeah,
Just so you know,
that's right. And that's
that's
amazing
what it
because
was.
I know that is hilarious. And again, it is, we've told people this and I've heard it before, but marriage and any relationship, it's not 50-50. It's 100% out of both parties,
Yes.
understanding that sometimes my 100% looks like 50. But if you have the confidence in your spouse, your partner, that they're giving it their all. And then I think the challenge even for us was, financially, Dave Ramsey, I love listening to Dave, and he's got some, great principles on financing. I think he focuses more on the lowest common denominator, really catering to people that are really struggling. And then you look at Robert Kiyosaki and some of his principles for investing. And I think having a little bit of balance in those is important.
Yes,
You know what I mean?
very much so.
But again, I think getting on the same page with your significant other, your
With your
spouse,
partner.
is
Yeah.
so important. And just like anything else, it's communication. And then you wouldn't think you'd have to say this, but honesty. And like I had
Oh, it
somebody,
is. You got to
because they
build
say,
trust.
and even in real estate, scripts and dialogues, I've heard people say, well, just say, if I can have your trust that I'm going to be honest with you. And he's like, why would you need my trust that you better be honest with me? That should just be a given. And yet so often it's not. Just people being honest with you as opposed to trying to get the deal or whatever else. And so I think there's a lot to be said. And
It's a lot of it.
Newsy brought that up. We were talking about, that's the other thing I was doing this week. I'm sending out my postcards. One of the things you want to do is
Old school. I love it.
but send yourself one, right?
Yeah.
Especially, not that I don't trust the U.S. Postal Service, but like I always, anytime I'm doing a mailer
I
of
love
anything,
it.
I add myself to the list so I can have an idea of when people are probably getting these. So there's a little gem tip for anybody,
Yeah,
looking to do some marketing and things like that. But
that's a great idea. I
yeah,
like
well,
that.
it's one of those things where I just knew that, how easy is it to just add one more stamp and send one to yourself so that you can expect when people are receiving theirs. But yeah, just a little tidbit there. How
Well,
about, go ahead.
as my friend Zach would say, it's all part of God's plan, God's
Yes.
will. That's what he
Amen.
believes.
And I think that's where, when you truly believe that the Lord has control of your life, not that, you can't just throw out the oars, right? I mean,
No,
there's
no,
going to be storms. There's going to be, reasons to need your own
always.
willpower. But I think having the comfort to know that he's never going to leave you nor forsake you, that goes such a long way in life. And then I think it's the same thing, like that commitment. I think people that know your commitment to the Lord and then your commitment to your spouse, one thing my father has always said, and I don't know it not to be true, but if you cheat on your wife, you'll cheat in life. And again, I'm not
Very
saying, but it's just one of those things where that is the greatest sacrifice in a spouse. And so if you're willing to cheat on them, they will, cheat in life. So it's an interesting side, because that probably doesn't always hold true, but at the same time, there is something to be said for that. So, but I was curious if you had any more real
Yeah,
estate questions for us. It is one other thing that I'll tell you. We're getting towards the end of the year here.
I
Um,
know.
Now, in 2018, I ran for office, and so
Correct.
I had to do this evaluation of all the properties that I had owned, and I went through for the taxes on all of them. And without any new assessments throughout our area, and there's a difference between assessed value and appraised value. But I went through all of the properties that, because we're peeling off some of these things that we've owned. But
Right.
in 2018, I was paying a total of about 97,000
In
in
Texas.
property taxes.
Yeah.
And in 2024, 6 years later, with no change in the value of assessment, I'm paying 113,000. So about another 16. So that's where, when people evaluate real estate, you cannot just look at it in the year you purchase it, right? Or they
Absolutely.
have a thing called an APOD, annual property operating data sheet. And I'm not saying you have to project 5 and 10 years out, but for real estate, especially cash flow and everything, you have to look at some of those fixed costs that aren't really fixed. They're dictated by your local government or whatever. But it's something that I always keep an eye on and look at, because it does have an effect on homes that are selling, and then of course just
Of
the way
course.
your school district operates. When we were in Chautauqua last night, I asked the waitress, I said, are you from this area? Yep, she grew up in Jamestown. And I just said, what part of the lake is best for like Airbnb or where. And so she had a pretty good idea. Now, there's what's called the Chautauqua Institute on Chautauqua, and that is very affluent. There's some serious zoning laws in there
Oh,
for
there's
historical purposes.
huge zoning laws.
But I'll tell you what, New York still, even when I think about Meg and I buying over there, those taxes are what I mean, a lot of those decisions are made, up there in Albany, and they take into account Manhattan and the boroughs, but they don't necessarily think about Western New York, where it's so much more like Pennsylvania's market as far as value and things like that. But at the same time, waterfront property, they're not making any more of it. And so that's where it's one of those things that for us in the next 20 years, it'll be interesting to see if that restaurant is still around in 20 years and what we will have looked back on to say, hey, this is what we did in the first 20 together. This is the next 20. And again, I'm hoping with all my faculties, because I've got girls to walk down the aisle and a bunch of other goals, if you will. So.
And it's funny you say that because I know my father was dealing with that because he's the town attorney, and
the solicitor.
The budget didn't pass. So
really? Oh boy,
the budget didn't pass. He had to go to a board meeting. I think it was either last night or 2 nights ago, and it was supposed to be like 45 minutes, and it ended up being like 2 hours because people were just furious, about the property taxes. Because it's like 10 grand, or I don't know how much, but it's a lot for this area, for New Hartford.
Yeah,
and that was the issue.
Well, and I do, one of my guests is
school tax. Yeah.
Yeah. But, and one of my guests that I'm trying to get on, he was in Pittsburgh, I think today, but he's a local supervisor. It's an elected position.
Yes.
But his background, he was in surveying. So he's got a great perspective. Like, he handles the roads, and honestly, in our area, we have some of the best roads. And so many people don't think about the infrastructure and the operations of the town you live in. But yeah, I mean, it is a serious undertaking. And if your dad's a solicitor, especially for the school district, because, at least for us in Pennsylvania, the taxing bodies are school, township, and then the county.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's where they all worry about themselves. But when they all have increases to the homeowners, that's a significant bump. And again, for the fixed income individuals, they just can't afford it when everything
you can't live. Yeah.
Going up. Yeah. So I totally understand that and hear that. And man, good for your dad for being able to justify, why they're doing it. It's never fun, but that's where you do need solid people willing to step up. And I think that's where a lot of that is just matter of fact. It's not really opinion based when you're talking budgets. This is X's and O's.
No, that's what he said. Yeah.
You got to increase revenue or decrease expenses. And the way they increase revenue is usually by tax increases.
Yeah.
And so again, the thing that frustrates me more is people don't look at the operations as much. They just come to that budget meeting, but it's like they don't really look at it. And that's what you expect the board to do that. But I love sitting on different boards because I ask some pointed questions that should be very easy to answer.
I wanted to go. You wouldn't let me go. I was going to go and ask questions. I said, Dad, can I come? I'm just going to be a dick. I just want to ask questions.
Put somebody out in the crowd to ask me some softball questions. But I mean, at the same time, it's also important to get.
Oh no, I was gonna ask hard questions. I was gonna be an asshole. He knew I was going to be an asshole. And he was like, absolutely not. He's like, I'm going to Uber there. He's like, no, you're not. You are not coming there. I was like, yes, I got to do this. But I know that's what he had to do because of the school. He's like, okay, so we're going to have to cut track or basketball, or is that what you guys want? I mean, that's what you're looking at. If we can't get this, we can't agree on this budget.
Yeah. And then I think that's where, again, I mean, so many budgets from my perspective should be zero-based budgets. I mean, especially in the government, because they just take and roll over. Oh, do you have more expenses versus what do you really need? Keeping it as trimmed back as possible. and understanding, from year to year what to expect. But yes, some of those bumps are in services, they're in, utility costs. I mean, all those
Yeah.
things play a role on it, and it's amazing. I wish more people would get involved. And I know as board members, you don't often want the public there, but I've always encouraged the public to ask questions. I mean,
I
you are
think
the
you should.
tax-paying people.
Yeah.
You absolutely should. And some of these, whether it's supervisors, like right now in one of the towns, they're looking at a new format of government, going from 3 supervisors to basically one manager with a larger board. And there's arguments both ways. But to me, and it's like, why doesn't everybody just do what's best for the township? Like
Because they're all selfish.
I mean, they keep appointing people that are in their corner for obvious reasons, but I still just yeah, I always had a hard time with that. And again, a lot of these are elected officials, whether you're a
Yeah.
tax collector, whether it's your supervisor. And sometimes people, they either don't vote at all or they don't even know who to vote for. They don't do, their due diligence or whatever else. So, yeah, so I've got a couple guys I'd love to get in here just to talk about more of those things. And it'll be interesting what changes. Like even when you look at the, that general election and some of what was that, Doge, the Department of, what do they're looking to create some more transparency in the government. And I loved it because Elon said, hey, we're going to post this all on X and it's going to be very transparent. And if you have issues that we're not covering, I want it to be brought up. I mean, there is a lot to be said for transparency. And we
Yeah.
know, like, even in a family, like there's only so much the kids need to know, right? But again, I think when you're looking at how you operate government and tax dollars, there needs to be a lot more transparency
There
without a
has to
doubt.
be.
And again, if you don't want there to be, that's an even bigger question. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's where there's no reason why you shouldn't want transparency and accountability. And again, I think that's where hopefully we start seeing more of that and more pushback from the general public to say, hey, what are you doing with our dollars? And how is it really benefiting, if not just me, the actual community to which I live and work in? Because so many of us are just out there working the grind and don't really have time to pay attention to that. And it's understandable, but at the same time, some people don't understand how much it really does affect your life.
No, I know because one of the big fights that they had was there's a field area where they want to put up solar generators, solar power. And that was like a huge issue with the public. And that was something that got voted on and argued about and voted on and argued about. And then it finally went through. And I think solar power is going to be for the best. It's going to save money on energy costs. But I guess they were just worried about where the location was. And I'm like, it's in the middle of nowhere. What do they care? But it seemed like people just wanted to argue, which I thought was funny.
Yeah, but the most frustrating thing, and this is where like part of the reason I ran in 2018 is so that I could speak to those things.
Yes.
I've said, oh, if you don't vote, don't make comments. It's like, well, if you don't run for office, don't make comments. Almost. No, I think everybody's entitled to it, certainly. But again, you can sit there and, we call them NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Yeah.
Those people, they always,
Yeah.
they can point out all the things that they don't want. But if you
The
ask
old
them, like,
men. Yeah.
oh, well, what would you like to see go in your township for more revenue generation or more opportunity? Oh, I don't know. No, you have no idea. You just know what you want to complain about. Everybody else's ideas, but you got none of your own. So
Right.
get to the back of the line.
Yeah.
But you need some people that are willing to stand up to that and push back a little bit. I think that's the other thing. There's nothing wrong with being challenged. And I'm pretty confident with my knowledge that if you push back a little bit, I can give you a justified reason for you to say,
Absolutely.
at least, okay, I understand where you're coming from. You might not have to agree with it. But at least if you understand, again, where it's coming from via experience or, whatever else, I think those are the things that hopefully people can be more open-minded to the way things go about. And that was a great last week with Bethany. Man, she's
Yeah, your
outstanding.
episode did great. Your episode was great with her.
Well, and
Did
it's
great
just
numbers.
I love seeing, again, strong women that, take the bull by the horns and try to help other women and empower other women. And like I said, even reflecting back on my wife, what gets her juices flowing is empowering not only other women, but people that aren't quite sure that they can do what she's done. And I think that's
Right.
where the more you can give back and express that to people. Hey, what's up, Link?
Hey, big man.
What you doing? What's up?
Can you go to Pop soon?
Yes, we can. I'll take you guys in just a little bit. Give me like 15, 20 minutes, okay?
What?
And no. All right.
What does he want to do?
Oh, they like to go to Papa's. So my parents
your
live
grandfather's,
just
yeah.
my parents live just down the road. So when they get home from getting off the bus, that's where we like to send them. We live on 10 acres, which I love,
Yeah.
not having a lot of people around. But when it came to having kids, it's like, oh, yeah, you probably want to be in a subdivision or something like that. So we actually have a little, best of both worlds, if you will, because we can get them down there and they can
Yeah.
live both ways, crossing a less busy street. But yeah.
Well, so to start, Danielle
Okay.
from Goddard, she
Oh, yeah.
had a question. She wanted to know, did you always believe that you would have success as a real estate agent?
Wow, that's a great question. And I think back 20 years ago when I got married, my wife was an accountant. And so
Right.
I was just kind of a sales associate, and I knew because it was commission based that there was a challenge in that. The other thing I recognized, especially being fresh out of college, essentially, is a lot of my peers weren't quite ready to buy a house. It was pretty close, like a few of them.
Yeah.
So I didn't really have a client base, right?
Yeah.
And I would
Yeah.
kind of get the crumbs of what my mother didn't have
You-
time for or something. But one of the things my mom insisted on, especially to my wife, when she's like, hey, if you don't have regular income, we might need to get another, part-time job. My mom has always insisted to be successful in real estate, you really have to go full-time.
Do they ever nobody pays a base with commission?
Yeah.
Or-
So
I was
like
just curious.
No. It's a great question. I think that's the biggest challenge. Even when I talk to potential agents, they don't necessarily know how it all works. And of course,
Yeah.
everybody would love some sort of base salary. The only one I do that with is for our property manager.
Do you know where Mom's iPad is?
I do not. But if you guys could please just give me like 15 minutes, that'd be awesome. So that's one of the things, like I wish it's a double-edged sword, because I think being commission based, it motivates you.
It motivates
creates-
you. Yeah. You
it
kill with
creates the
the
type
eat
of
with the bill.
people,
Yeah.
and I've told people that before. I coach the pole vault and I work with real estate agents because they both have to be assertive. Like, I
Yes.
don't call any of our agents and ask them if they have appointments today.
Nope. You don't
it's gotta-
micromanage.
No, and that was something what I loved about the business, and I think that's where it is not a business for everyone.
Right.
And I think it back in the day, it was like, oh, the husband had a high paying job, and so the wife got a real estate license to go, to the coffee shops and
Yeah,
have
sure.
brunch and things. So that's changed a lot. But another thing my wife and I were curious about is, will these transactions tick back up like they were a few years ago? Like, inventory is really low, but the number of transactions just
Yeah.
have not been happening. And there's a number of reasons why. But I guess I remember being much more busy than what we have been over the last few years. And I think every market is cyclical. So I do foresee
It
that
is.
coming. But I think that's the other thing. Like, for a new agent that might not have a lot of business going on, try to latch on to a really experienced agent who has a lot of business. And
Yeah.
that's where I go back to my earlier point where, like, hey, nobody wants to work for free. But if you can work for somebody as an assistant, and whether it's hourly or a portion of the next commission,
Knowledge is power. Knowledge is money.
It really is. And then the other thing is being able to negotiate for yourself.
Yes.
I recently watched something on Instagram where they were teaching trades and they were doing their welds, right? TIG welds and things like that. And so he'd ask the student, what do you think you're worth an hour? And some of them would say, 12, 15. And he came in, he's like, I'd pay you 18. And it was interesting because not only like he was doing it because he wanted to encourage the kids. It wasn't just blowing smoke, but it was like,
No,
hey,
this is what you're
okay,
worth.
I want
Yeah.
you to know that you're actually worth a little bit more if you keep doing that good of work, that quality of work. And again, I think in welding, you see a product, you see a finish. It's a lot easier than, hey, get in the car, show some homes. They might start looking now and not buy until May, but you won't get paid until then. So good, you know what I
Right.
mean? It's such a different industry that it requires a lot of tenacity. You know what I mean? Because not only to get a
You
deal,
gotta
but to
you
get a
gotta
deal
hustle.
done. You got to work
Yeah.
like right before I came on here, I got
It's
an
so much
email.
work.
We have a closing that was supposed to take place tomorrow, and now he's extending it to the 25th.
Oh, I know.
Not
I
the
hear
end of the
that all the
world.
time. Yeah.
But listen, years ago, I would have already had like my budget for that commission ready to spend the day it was
Yeah.
supposed to close.
Yeah.
And then you realize it's like, hey, don't count your chickens till they're hatched. So yeah, that's a really good question. But I think again, the confidence comes from doing more deals
Yeah.
and knowing that you never know what the next deal might entail. May have never experienced it, but you have enough advisors around you between my mother, my brothers, myself, that just feel free to reach out and we'll do the best we can to answer that question. And if we don't know, we're not going to
Yeah.
lie to you. We're just going to go
Yeah.
find out the information. So
Danielle also asked, is your fee negotiable?
always
Oh, it is.
negotiable. It is,
Really?
absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's where even with that recent lawsuit, part of the frustration from a lot of us is that none of these sellers were forced to list at a certain price. It's always been negotiable. There's not standards in the industry.
Okay.
I mean, it everything kind of fluctuates because, and I've seen it more on the low end, right? Let's say I have a $20,000 piece of property. Like I usually would charge a minimum of $3,500 fee. If you just
Right.
charge 3%, you're getting, or 6%, you're getting, no money for that deal. So it just doesn't make sense to get out of bed for that.
No,
So
not at
yeah,
all.
all fees are negotiable. And now listen, at the same time, I think I've had people, it doesn't offend me when they ask, and I also give them the line, hey, if I can't negotiate food on my table, how am I going to be able to negotiate food on yours?
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong. And what I love to do, I had this recently, a guy came, wanted my opinion. I worked it for a while. And it's like, hey, I appreciate the opportunity, but it's just not worth my time to
Right.
do it for that price. He said, I
Yeah.
understand, but not everybody can afford my service. And
Yeah.
that's one where if you have somebody really proud, they might end up trying to hire you just because you told them you can't afford my service. And I learned that
Yeah.
one from the guys in roofing, just because nobody wants to told they can't afford somebody. But at the same time, understanding your value is very important so that you don't just take that lower commission. And I can guarantee you, it is going to be the hardest deal you've ever worked, and it is not worth the money. And I think, again, once you see enough of those red flags, as you get your experience, it's okay to say no. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that
And
I
it's
go
better.
back to,
Yeah.
I'd rather let you down now than disappoint you later, because you just don't understand my value. And until you've been through this process, I can understand. But from the time you hire me until we get this deal closed, I am on my toes and working, a substantial amount of time that may never, fully be compensated. So
Michael from Harbor Creek
yeah,
had
Creekers.
wanted to know, do you put together, like, what is your plan for marketing a home? Like, how do you put together a plan to market this home and put it on the market?
Yeah, that's another really good question. And I know Newsy said he goes out when somebody mentions they want to list their home with him. He takes like a pre-listing packet out for them, which is a great
Oh, right.
idea. Yeah, and that way it helps describe. It's kind of similar to when we talked about a buyer consultation, where what
Right.
what you want to do is get an understanding of that process, because a lot of people have never been through it, and so they just want to understand, like, what is your marketing plan? From the day it goes on, it goes number one in the MLS. And then there's so many websites that syndicate the property. And then a lot of times, there was a time when, hey, we'll plan an open house, but homes have been selling so quick. The marketing plans have been depleted because it's like, oh, put it up for whatever you want and you'll get it. And so I think that's where a lot of that has changed. The platforms like social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook are all, places where, just like anything else, video content helps. I know we've talked about marketing some of the homes that we have doing short videos for them. And honestly, over the last few years, as soon as you're done editing the video,
It's gone.
it's gone.
Yeah.
And not that it's not worth doing it, but it's like when you talk about marketing and the marketing plan, that's that first portion to get somebody in the door, get it under contract. That's when really a lot of that work begins. The
Right.
coordination of your inspections, your appraisals, the bank, the lender, the attorneys, all of those inspectors. So you're really doing more hand holding throughout the process than anything else. And then I think that the other important thing, especially for newer agents, is to try to keep doing all of the things in the process all of the time. And so that it takes away some of that ebb and flow of revenue where it's like, oh, I'm working, showing all these homes, and then I'm negotiating homes, and then I'm closing them. But if you're not doing all of those things at the same time, over a number of transactions, you'll have 2 or 3 closings, at the start of the month, and then 45 days later, another couple closings. And that's not easy to do, but the way you do it is by staying in touch with your clients at all time, making sure on the buy side, they're getting notifications for listings that come up. Then on the listing side, again, you want to be pricing it appropriately, watching what other things are selling for, and then picking and choosing different things, whether it's price improvements, whether it's an open house. Is the concern it's exposure? Like, we have data on the back side where when I list the property, I can see how many emails immediately go out to people who are searching for a home with that criteria. And so I have a buyer right now, I'm showing a home to him tomorrow. And he's emailed me a list of things that I can put into our system. And I keep it broad to start. So that, like, say you want at least 2 acres. It's like, okay, I'm still going to search 1 acre to 5 acres because you never know that place that has 1.5 and you insist on 2. Well, it's laid out really well. So you kind of broaden your scope to start and then start narrowing it down.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
because and especially right now with inventory being so low, I just told a client this the other day. It's like, if you have a wish list of whatever things you want, if 80% of those things are in a house or a property, at least make an offer, because to find 100% of what your wants or needs are,
it's
especially
rare.
when you have a man and woman. Like the home I showed him to had a really nice garage. This guy's got he recently opened a cigar lounge, so he wanted to have kind of like a detached garage with a cigar lounge at his house. And this one house really set up. The garage did, but the house didn't work for the wife. So, a lot of times it's hoping you have things that appeal to all parties, quite honestly.
It's like the white elephant. You're just searching for it sometimes.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like every home will sell. It's just at what price. And I think that's the important thing. Everybody thinks about the marketing plan, but that's where I turn into more of a C personality, and I dig into the data and really look and see what else is moving, who else is looking, and then following back up with these agents. And we have systems available when there's a price improvement. Like, we made a recent adjustment to a property, and what it does is it sends a new email out to all these people with their criteria. And almost inevitably, when you do a price improvement, you'll get 2 or 3 new appointments, or you should. And if it wasn't a large enough price improvement, you might need to make another one. And I think those are the types of things where, again, it's paying attention to the market, understanding the timing of things. Like we said, once the election was over, we figured, the market would open up a little bit. And now then you throw into the weather. Okay, well, it's 30 degrees right now in Erie. So, and it's rainy and overcast. And so I'd rather wait until next week to list my home or whatever else. But nothing is being delayed so long as, well, I'm just going to wait till spring. Because again, inventory is so low. If you need a place to sell, or if you need to sell a place, it's best to get on the market right now.
So we had, let's see, it looks like Lauren from Wattsburg asked, do you provide or have to give or are asked to give references at all?
Every once in a while we have a pretty solid reputation at this point, and so much, I think 86% of our business is word of mouth. But I mean, we can certainly, provide, and that's where I guess so often it's referred to us anyways, that the people I would reference are the people who recommended they reach out to us, if you will. But yeah, I mean, I can't think of one client that I have who I would not turn to and ask, you know what I mean? They would give me business because of what I like to think is my work ethic, honesty, and communication. I think that's the biggest thing. As much as there's some people who say, "Oh, I never answer my phone." Well, I don't answer my phone because I've talked to my clients. They've heard the spiel. I'd rather be with the people I'm with, but that doesn't mean I don't communicate. I get back to them, before the end of the day, when I say I'm going to. And I think that's more important than anything, is doing what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. And that's true for anything, but especially in sales. There's just nothing worse than having somebody tell you they're going to do something and then they don't do it. Yeah.
Ripley from Shorehaven had a question. How and when do you actually get paid if you sell a house?
Yeah, another good question, and this is where, like I said earlier, you don't count your chickens till they're hatched. But we get paid as far now in Pennsylvania. Everything, when a property closes, the brokerage gets paid. So every check they close, it goes to Marsh & Marsh, and then from
we pay out.
And then we pay our agent that same day. There are some local brokers that let the check sit and then they pay them 2 days, 3 days later. We are still of the perspective from a brokerage side where you guys, the agents, have already been waiting 30, 45 days from when it went under contract. They may have been showing them homes for over a year. So I want them to get paid as soon as we get paid. But I've had deals where worked at however many months, and then the day of closing, the buyer walks and we don't get paid anything.
That's terrible.
It's rare that happens where somebody's in default, but that's where I say you do not. I mean, I don't cash commission checks until those things have really closed. And even it's going to close this afternoon. I'm like, I am not putting the check in the bank because I know there's been too many instances where I sit at a closing, and whether it's delayed a day or a week, but you get paid when it officially closes, at least in our brokerage and in our business.
I got you.
The good thing is, because they're closed out in such a professional way, once it does close, we are assured to get paid. I think of a lot of these, vendors that do work for clientele, and they just don't get, there's nothing. They're just banking on the consumer to pay them. We have legal ramifications, and you can't close unless all these, T's are crossed and I's are dotted, and commissions is a part of that closing disclosure. So that gives us some comfort in knowing we're going to get paid, but we do not get paid until the property actually closes.
So Mark from DeWittville wanted to know, how much does a seller actually pay in closing costs?
So for a seller side, it's pretty straightforward. On the buy side, especially if there's a mortgage, there's a number of fees involved with title and all this. On the seller side, in our part of Pennsylvania, we pay 1% transfer tax. The buyer pays the other. So 1% of the sale price goes to your local township. Then you have an attorney fee, which around these parts.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah. So how much does my dad make if he does
600 if they're doing a closing, usually anywhere from 500 to 750, depending. I would say for to get
because
it closed
he's
out.
done both. He's
Yeah.
represented the bank before, and then he's represented clients before.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
is it possible to do both? Like, could he
It is.
represent the bank and the client?
Yeah. A lot of
Oh,
times
wow.
they can. Yep.
Oh, okay.
And
I
again,
didn't
as
know
long
that.
as there's full disclosure, a lot of times
Yeah.
we have even dual agency where I can represent both buyers and sellers. But
And
a
it's not
seller
a
would have.
conflict.
Nope, it's not a conflict because it's fully disclosed. There's some that might question it or not feel comfortable with it, at which point they don't need to utilize dual agency, but there's not a conflict per se. And then you have the agent's fees. So like when I work with a seller, I break out two different fees where what they'll pay
Correct.
me as a brokerage and then what we'll pay a buyer's agent, and that's the big topic of discussion right now.
Yes.
Is making sure the seller understands, are they willing to pay a buyer's agent through the transaction? Do you want to wait until see what the buyer's agent is requesting for compensation? And it's like they've taken that off the table as far as discussing it. But when I'm talking to sellers and for the most part, we want to pay buyer's agents because they're bringing the buyer and working the deal all the way through the coordination and all of that. So,
Right.
and that can fluctuate anywhere from,
Wow.
there's some places that we're doing 2% all the way up to 8%. So there's no set fee. It's all negotiable. But that is where a lot of times most sellers can expect the 1% for the transfer tax, the commissions, and then the attorney fees. So it's pretty cut and dry, fairly simple for a seller to understand. And then, like, I had a client who said, well, if I still have a mortgage, I think you actually asked me that at one point.
I did that. Yes.
What if I still have a mortgage?
You can when you sell your house.
Yeah. So, and what's cool, like we're closing on two of our properties, one of my entities, and it's on what's called a blanket loan. So there's more than one property attached to a single loan.
Oh,
And
wow.
so and it's nice just because the convenience, it's one monthly payment, all that sort of stuff. So as we're liquidating them, they want to keep a certain portion to know that they have equity as a bank for comfort if we ever, decide not to pay or whatever. But they require a certain amount when we close and sell the asset, so much of that mortgage to be paid off. So that's where we just had two that we have closing. We sold one for, I think, 133.5, the other one for 135, and the one property we owe 33, the other we owe like 44. So we'll clear, about 180 on those two properties after owning them for 16 years. But the beauty of that is we've been the managers of the property. Like, we used OPM, which is other people's money. The tenant's rent is what we use to pay the mortgage, the taxes, all of that. And so that's where
perfect.
real estate really isn't a tricky game. I mean, if you keep it simple, stupid, it can really work out. Just because, and I heard that recently, the beauty of investment real estate isn't so much the revenue generated as it is the debt that's being reduced by, you have a mortgage, you have a tenant paying you to pay down that mortgage. And that's where the beauty of real estate investment, and especially when it positively cash flows, that's the beauty of real estate. And the fact that I can drive by that property and see the value in the brick and mortar, if you will, along with the tenant who has agreed to pay the expenses. Now, and there's parts of the country that the tenant's rent doesn't cover all the expenses, but they're in an area where that property, if they can just get somebody to help them pay for it, they know over the next 5 to 10 years, the appreciation value is so great that it was worth them doing that. Like I've said that before, so many people are willing to put money into their 401k every month. And yet you're paying, when you buy a stock or anything like that, you're paying fair market value. That's just what it is that day. Every piece of real estate that I've purchased has been 60 to 70 cents on the dollar.
Easily.
You make your money on the front end, but when you know what you're looking for and you can find good deals, and then they're leverageable. So that's where real estate is just such a beautiful thing.
It's a freaking game.
It really is. But even it's a justification also.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like
there's give and take.
When the sellers say, well, I don't know if I want to pay a buyer's agent, it's like, okay, the agent is representing the buyer. Like the funds that you're going to get to pay off your mortgage, to pay off all your fees, that's coming from the buyer's purchase price, right? Like
Right.
it's all just on paper shifting. And so again, those are the types of things where it's super valuable to understand where everything's coming and going. But in real estate, it's really hard to skirt any of those fees that you inevitably will need to
Exactly.
pay. And so again, having a clear understanding and somebody to properly advise you and walk you through that is really where our value as agents is. You know what I mean? We should be able to provide some comfort in that process, as stressful as we acknowledge it very well could be. It is just a part of the process, and we will get through it. And I think assuring clients that you'll get through it is the biggest thing we can do to provide some comfort for them.
I know you got to run. I'm going to ask you one more.
Yeah.
This is from Jessica in Panama. She says, I don't want to use a real estate agent. I want to sell a home by myself. How difficult is that to do?
That's another good question.
She thinks she can post it on Facebook, Instagram, and just sell it herself.
Yeah, and I think you can, but
Right.
I'll tell you what, there is nothing worse than getting fleeced in a transaction. And I mean, there are so many savvy buyers out there. I'm talking, and especially investors, because this is their livelihood, is making great deals. And I will be the first one to tell you, and I know consumers feel this way too, as far as buy. When they see a for sale by owner, they don't look at it like, oh, they're going to save some money by not using an agent. Their
eyes light up.
They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had instances where I've gone into a for sale by owner, and the seller, I remember there was one time my brother Lucas and I were going in to buy a duplex, and the seller was right there, and I'm like, well, how much do you think you want for it? And I told Lucas going in, I'm like, I bet he's going to ask like 75 or 80,000, and it's probably worth that. And so we're in the kitchen, and the seller, who was a friend of Lucas's, looks at us and he says, I know you're in business. I know this is you. So I don't mean to cut out the middleman, but I really got it. I've been looking around. I really got to get at least 60,000 for this. And I'm like,
done.
Okay. I'm like, all right, well, let me talk to Lucas about it.
Yeah, you can't sell it. You got to look like it's, you got to think about it.
I mean, and so again, like, I don't know if I would have paid 75 or 80 at the time. I just thought that was what he was going to ask. And so when I knew he said 60, I'm like, okay.
It's huge.
I know you didn't want to cut me out, but if you would have come to me before you decided to sell it to us and say, hey, what do you think this could sell for?
You would have tried to get
I'd have been 15 to 20 over. Yeah. And so that's where, yes, you can sell it yourself, but and it's not even, again, I go back, the marketing of it and finding a buyer is like the first little step.
Yes.
Getting it through the finish line is where the work really begins. And again, coordinating it. So whoever that for sale by owner is, like, I hope you have time to make random calls at 10 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon to an attorney, or run over and open the property for somebody, or, all the showings. Are you going to accompany showings? Or are you going to just let
Well, does it also work the other way where they will ask for like $40,000 too much?
Yeah, and I think that is what happens. I think the challenge is also when they put it on the market, right? And they don't get any leads because they don't necessarily know what they're doing. And now they go to hire an agent and they try to just add your fee on top of what they were just asking. And I'm like, hey, if nobody came at your price, yes, I will get you a lot more exposure. That doesn't mean they're going to pay, my fee on top of it. And so, yes, I think that's where, and honestly, I think you could find an agent, the for sale by owners, as long as you're willing to pay a buyer's agent, which, again, this doesn't make sense to me why you wouldn't want somebody advising you. And then we're going to sell it enough so that you can justify my fee and the buyer's fee. But at least be willing to work with buyer's agents so that they can write the offer, get it over the finish line. I just worry about the for sale by owners that they're going to get halfway through this transaction, get everything out of their house, and then the deal falls apart. And now they really have no idea what to do. literally are lost. Now they want to
Yeah.
sue somebody, and it's like, listen, you didn't do X, Y, and Z, and if you would have called
You
me,
started it. Yeah.
yeah,
You started all the
right,
trouble.
yeah,
It's
and
all
I
on
think, yeah, so it's possible now. It's getting more challenging. Like in the last few years, when you could put a price on any home and it would sell, I would say it was easier for sale by owner. Um,
you.
But it is, yeah, that's an interesting phenomenon. They just don't have the same exposure because so many buyers that are out there looking in the market have already committed to working with an agent. And so they want to be able to find property that agent can help advise them on, not get resistance from a seller that doesn't want to pay a commission.
So, you think you may be able to come to the Syracuse game?
Yeah. Yes, I have it marked down. Did you see they just announced we've got him in 2028? Also on 11/11 of 28, I guess they announced the
Oh, good,
Syracuse.
good,
And
good.
I'm like, hey, you people know they're not only like a future opponent like next week, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but
We
yeah,
may do a conference. That's the thing. Hopefully we get into a conference.
well, we have to put up a good showing. You know what I mean?
Well,
It's like,
we are. I mean, I think we're going to do all right against Syracuse. We're definitely going to beat UMass. So 8-4, go to a bowl game. Basketball takes care of itself. I think we'll get into a conference, and that's why I forgot to mention Procyon Partners, our sponsor, Sean Rabinowitz. They specialize in wealth management, retirement planning, and employee benefits. They're one of the top 50 fastest growing companies in the nation. And then his son, Ben, has leukemia. They're doing a bone marrow drive at UConn. Please go to it.
okay.
And if not, I'm going to put a link to the website. You can have a kit mailed to your house. And it's just a quick cheek swab. You send it back, and you could be the match to save Ben's life. Pete Finch and the Finch Law Firm, a new sponsor. If you've been arrested, you feel your rights have been violated, they offer a ton of different services. If you're in a pinch, call Finch. And then Bleeding Blue for Good. Mike Burton has done an incredible job. We have won 7 games because he has raised money through Bleeding Blue, our NIL collective, and brought in the talent like Skylar Bell, like Darrell Robinson, like Nick Evers, and it's making a difference. Everything he's doing is paying off. The transfer portal opens in 1 month. So we need to do all we can. All we need is more people to donate. He did it with 10 people last year. If we can get more people to give, and we have strength in numbers at UConn, we will continue to have success. We need to keep players that we have that are talented, and we need to bring in the transfers that we need for success. So that is my spiel. For the great Laban Marsh, another phenomenal episode answering your questions. I am Steve Cully, the best podcast host in the universe. This has been Husky Talk, Broker Than You. Remember, when life gives you lemons, don't make lemonade. Take 2 oranges and throw them back at